The autumn wind swept across the wide Wyoming plains, carrying the scent of sage and dust that had become part of the frontier's soul. The year was 1887, and the small town of Redemption Creek sat like a scar on the land. Its wooden buildings leaned against each other for shelter, and its single dirt road connected the saloon, the general store, and the auction house, the three places that kept life going in a town full of hard men and desperate women. Jacob Harlow stood on the porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon, boots propped on the railing, a glass of whiskey in hand. At 35, he was one of the richest ranchers in the territory, owner of the Double Ranch that stretched beyond the horizon. His weathered face told of battles fought and won against dust, drought, and men who'd tried to take what washes. Deep-set gray eyes missed nothing. Men tipped their hats when they passed him. Women, though curious, kept their distance. Something about Jacob Harlow carried danger, the kind that couldn't be softened by money or a fine suit. "Another auction today," said Tom Brennan, his foreman and oldest friend, stepping out beside him. "Heard there's a new widow in the mix." Jacob didn't answer right away. The autumn auction should become a cruel habit in Redemption Creek, a place where widowed or abandoned women put themselves up for bidding in exchange for food and shelter. It was a practice that made him uneasy, though he'd never said so aloud. Out here, sentiment was weakness. "Who's she?" he finally asked. "Don't know much," Tom replied, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Came in on yesterday's stage all wrapped in black like a crow. Folks call her the mystery widow. Nobody's seen her face." Inside the saloon, men were already laughing, placing bets on who'd win which woman, turning hardship into entertainment. The sound made Jacob's jaw tighten. He'd never join those auctions. He didn't need a wife, mysterious or otherwise. His ranch ran fine. His bed was never cold when he didn't want it to be, and he had no use for complications. Still, something about the way Tom said mystery widow tugged at him. From across the street, Judge Samuel Morrison, auctioneer, magistrate, and self-appointed moral compass, was already setting up his platform. "Come on, boys," the judge called, his voice booming over the crowd. 5 fine ladies looking for good Christian homes. The street filled quickly, boots scuffed, laughter rose, and the smell of sweat and whiskey thickened the air. Jacob stayed on the porch, arms crossed, watching the first women brought out. Heck knew most of them: Sarah Mills, Betty Donovan, young Annie Peterson. Life had dealt them bad hands. But then she appeared, the mystery widow. She stepped onto the platform in a black cloak that covered her from head to toe. A heavy veil hid her face completely. Black gloves, black dress, even black shoes. While the others fidgeted under the town's stare, she stood perfectly still, shoulders straight, proud. For a moment, the chatter died. The crowd of rough men fell quiet, unsettled by a woman who hid everything, yet somehow demanded their attention. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Now, gentlemen, this lady prefers privacy. Educated, can read and write, knows her way around a household. Her name will remain private until arrangements are made." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "What's she hiding?" someone shouted. "Maybe she's diseased," another joked. "Or ugly as sin," came Thalof. Jacob felt irritation rise. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something he couldn't name. He found himself stepping off the porch, pushing through the mass of bodies until he stood near the front. The woman didn't flinch beneath all those eyes. She stood like a statue carved from midnight. Yet, Jacob noticed her gloved hands twitch slightly at her sides, betraying a tremor she was trying to hide. "Let's start at $20, Judge Morrison called. No one spoke. "10 then?" Still nothing. The judge's grin faltered. Jacob's gaze stayed locked on the veiled figure. He could almost feel her fear, though she stood so still. From behind him, a familiar mocking drawl broke the silence. "Hey, Harlow," Jacob turned. Buck Watson, another rancher, rich in swagger, poor in brains, staggered from the saloon, grinning like a wolf. "I got a proposition for you." Jacob said nothing, but the crowd's attention shifted toward the two men. Buck slapped a wad of bills into his palm. "I'll bet you $100 you can't get that crow to show what's under them feathers. Hell, make it 200 if you can bet her by sunrise." Laughter exploded through the crowd. The woman on the platform stiffened. "You're drunk, Watson," Jacob said flatly. Maybe Buck grinned wider. "But my money's good? Or maybe the great Jacob Harlow's afraid of a little mystery. Losing your touch with the ladies, are you?" Jacob felt his pride flare like dry grass in a spark. "Walk away," the rational part of him said, but the crowd was watching. So was she. "Make it 300, Jacob heard himself say. "You've got a bet." Buck's smirk turned into a satisfied sneer. Done. The judge, sensing profit, banged his gavel eagerly. We have a bid. Mr. Harlow offers 50. 75, Jacob corrected, voice low but firm. And that's final. The gavel came down hard. Sold to Mr. Jacob Harlow, the crowd roared. As the noise died, Jacob stepped forward. The woman hadn't moved. She seemed carved from stone. Ma'am, he said quietly, offering his hand to help her down. For a long moment, she didn't react. Then slowly, she placed her gloved hand in his. Her touch was light, trembling but alive. My name is Clara, she whispered through the veil. Clara Thornton. Jacob helped her down from the platform and led her toward his wagon. The crowd parting to watch. Laughter followed them. Cruel and echoing, but he ignored it. As they drove out of Redemption Creek, the sun dipped low, bleeding red across the horizon. Jacob kept his eyes on the road, hands tight on the rez. He could feel her presence beside him, silent, composed, hiding a storm behind that veil. He told himself it was just a bet, just pride. But deep down he knew he'd just stepped into something far more dangerous than any wager he'd ever made. And as the wind carried the last slaughter of the town behind them, Jacob Harlow wondered if he just bought salvation or damnation. The wagon wheel squeaked over the rutted road as Jacob Harlow guided the team through the fading light. The prairie stretched endless around them, glowing orange under the dying sun. Clara Thornton sat beside him, silent and still beneath her layers of mourning black. He wanted to speak toast why a woman like her would end up on an auction block. But every word that came to mind sounded wrong. The sound of the reins in his gloved hands filled the silence between them. You don't have to be afraid, he finally said. I'm not afraid, she answered softly. Her voice was calm, but something about it held Wade like she had run out of fear long ago and replaced it with something colder. I just don't know what comes next. Jacob didn't either. He'd won her on a bet, and that truth sat heavy on his chest. When the double ranch finally came into view, dusk had settled deep. The house stood tall and square, its porch light glowing faintly in the gathering dark. Corral spread out like ribs, and beyond them the prairie ran on forever. He helped her down from the wagon. Welcome to the Double H, Mrs. Thornton. I'd rather you call me Clara, she said quietly. All right, Clara. The name felt strange on his tongue, personal, dangerous. Maria, his longtime housekeeper, appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of the veiled figure. Senor Harlow. Maria, this is Mrs. Thornton. Jacob said she'll be staying here. Please prepare the blue room. Maria hesitated. The blue room was the finest in the house, usually reserved for business guests or visiting family, but she nodded quickly. Si, Senor. Clara inclined her head. Thank you. Jacob watched her follow Maria inside. Her posture was straight, proud, every movement graceful. Yet he noticed how her gloved hands trembled when she touched the stair rail. He went to the barn, needing the quiet. The bed with Buck Watson gnawed at him now. Pride had driven him to it. Not desire, but the memory of her stillness on that platform. Her quiet dignity among all that cruelty haunted him. When he returned to the house, Maria was waiting in the kitchen. She's in her room, she said in a low voice. She is sad. Why she hide her face, senor? She lost her husband and child in a fire. Jacob said, leave her be tonight. Maria crossed herself. Ah, Dios mío, poor woman, my cousin. She was burned once, never showed her face again. The thought hit him like a hammer. Burned scars. That would explain the veil, the gloves, the way she moved like someone protecting herself from the world's gaze. He poured a drink but couldn't finish it. Upstairs he heard footsteps pacing back and forth above his head. Soft, measured steps that carried restlessness. Later, near midnight, a knock came at his door. Jacob set down his glass. Comin'? The door opened slowly. Clara stood there, still dressed in black, though her outer cloak was gone. The lamp light caught the thin outline of her face behind the veil. I apologize for intruding, she said, voice steady, but I thought it best we settle this matter now. He rose uneasy. Mrs. Thornton, Clara, she corrected. All right, Clara, you don't need to. Please. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Let me speak before I lose my nerve. Jacob stayed still, waiting. You made a wager, she said. I heard them laughing in the crowd. That you could get me to remove my veil before sunrise. Jacob's stomach twisted. It was foolish talk. I don't expect you to. She began undoing the pins holding her veil. Her fingers shook slightly, but her voice remained calm. 14 months ago, my husband and son died in a fire. Our home burned because of men hired by a railroad company my husband opposed in print. I was a newspaper editor, a man of words. The first veil dropped to the floor. Only a fine mesh remained. Through it, Jacob could see the faint outline of her features. I tried to save them, she continued. But I couldn't, I lived, they didn't. Her hands moved again, unfastening the final layer. The mesh slipped away. Jacob drew a slow breath. The left side of her face was marked by burn scars, shiny, uneven patches of pale and red that traveled from temple to jaw. The damage extended into her scalp where her hair had burned away and never returned. The right side of her face, though, remained untouched. Here, a gray and fierce met his steadily. She reached up and removed her wig, revealing a head mostly bare except for a few uneven streaks of brown hair. "This is what you bought, Mr. Harlow," she said evenly. The mystery widow revealed. "You've won your bet. Shall I send for your friend so he can pay what's owed?" Jacob's throat tightened. "No, that's not." She laughed once bitterly. "It's all right. I'm used to stares. Used to men making bets about me." "Clara," he said quietly, "you misunderstand. I won't collect on that wager. You have every right to your privacy. I'll pay Watson myself and tell him I lost." Her voice softened, the edge fading. "And what will the town say when you protect the burned widow?" "They can say what they want," Jacob replied. "If Agnon has something to say about you, they can say it to me first." Clara's eyes filled with something he couldn't read. "Pain, disbelief, maybe gratitude. Why would you do that?" Jacob looked either at the scars, at the strength it took to stand before him. "Because you've survived more than most men ever could. And because I'm tired of being the kind of man who wins bets on other people's pain." She looked away, breathing unevenly. Then she set the wig down on his chair. "I should go." "You can stay," he said. "The blue room is yours as long as you want it. You're safe here." Her lips trembled slightly. "I've forgotten what safe feels like." "Then maybe this is where you start remembering." Clara hesitated at the door, then turned back. "Thank you, Jacob, for seeing me." He nodded. "We all have scars, Clara. Some just wear theirs where the world can see them." She left quietly and the door closed behind her. Jacob sat down, staring at the wig she'd left behind. He'd begun the day as a man driven by pride and boredom. Now he sat humbled, shaken by a woman who'd lost everything, yet still carried herself with dignity. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, rattling the windows like a warning, or perhaps a promise. He didn't know which. But he knew one thing for certain. The bet was over. And for the first time in years, Jacob Harlow cared deeply about someone other than himself. The following weeks brought a quiet rhythm to the Double H Ranch, one that neither Jacob nor Clara had expected. The woman who had arrived silent and veiled now moved through the house with purpose. She tended to the garden that had long been neglected, reorganized Maria's pantry, and filled the kitchen with the scent of bread and herbs. At first, the ranch hands kept their distance. They'd heard the gossip in town, how the rich rancher had bought the burned widow on a drunken wager. But I'm changed things. When one of the younger hands cut his arm, mending a fence, Clara was the one who stitched the wound, her hand steady, her manner calm. After that, Noon avoided her. Jacob often watched her from the porch. In the sunlight, the scars on her face softened, blending into the strength beneath them. What amazed him wasn't her survival. It was how she kept choosing to live. One morning, Tom Brennan joined him, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "That woman's got a way about her, boss. You seen that garden? Never grew a thing in 3 years. Now it's full of life." Jacob smiled faintly. "She's got a way about a lot of things." Tom gave him a knowing look. "Maybe it's time you tell her that." Jacob didn't answer. He was thinking about the night Buck Watson came to collect his winnings. Jacob had paid him off, claiming he'd lost the bet. But Buck wasn't done stirring trouble. He'd left Redemption Creek whispering that Jacob Harlow had gone soft, protecting a woman who should have been hidden away. Word spread fast. But Jacob didn't care. Let them talk. That afternoon, Clara found him saddling his horse. "Where are you going?" she asked. "North pasture, need to check the wells." He hesitated. "You ride?" A small smile touched her lips. "I haven't in a long time. Then today's as good a day as any tour member." Maria helped find her clothes that would fit. A loose shirt, a skirt shortened for the saddle, and a wide hatto shade her face. When she stepped outside, Jacob felt his chest tighten. She looked uncertain but determined, her chin lifted against the wind. They rode side by side across the prairie. Thielen was dry from lack of rain, the grass brittle and brown, but in that vastness there was peace. "It's beautiful," Clara said. "So empty it almost hurts." "It's honest," Jacob replied. "This land doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It takes everything from you, but what it gives back you earn." They reached the creek bed that had nearly run dry. Jacob dismounted and crouched near the trickling water. If the drought keeps up, we'll have to dig deeper wells. Clara knelt beside him. In Kansas, before the fire, Robert wrote about windmills that could draw water from deep underground. Maybe that's something to try. Jacob looked at her impressed. You read his papers? Quote, I edited them, she said with a small proud tilt of her head. Robert had ideas, butterable spelling. I fixed that and handled the printing when he was sick. Jacob smiled. You'd make a fine ranch foreman. She laughed quietly. That may be the strangest compliment I've ever received. They stood together, Thessalon's between them warm this time. Clara Ara, he said at last. You've brought life back to this place. To me? She looked at him, then really looked at him. You've given me a reason to stop hiding. Before he could speak, the distant rumble of hooves broke the moment. A group of riders approached. 5 men, their laughter carried by the wind. Jacob's jaw tightened when he recognized them. Ned Bartlett and his crew. Well, well, Ned called as they drew near. If it ain't the mighty Jacob Harlow and his burned beauty. His men laughed, the sound cruel and sharp. Clara's hands tightened on the reins, but her voice was calm. Afternoon, gentlemen. Ned's eyes gleamed with malice. You should keep that veil on, lady. Sun's a mean thing on scars. Quote, choose your next words carefully, Jacob warned. The laughter died. Ned's smirk faltered as Jacob's voice turned cold as steel. You forget yourself, Bartlett. You're on my land. One of the younger riders nudged Ned's elbow. Let's go, boss. Ain't worth it. Ned spat into the dust but turned his horse around. Sure, Harlow. No offense meant. They rode off, their laughter fading into the wind. Clara released a shaky breath. I'm sorry for what? For bringing trouble to your door. Jacob turned his horse toward home. That trouble's not yours anymore. It's mine now. That night she stood by the porch as the sky filled with stars. Jacob joined her, offering a cup of coffee. You don't owe me anything, she said softly. Maybe not, he replied. But I want to. Her eyes shone in the starlight. You're a good man, Jacob Harlow, even if you don't think so. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing her gloved ones. And you're stronger than any person I've ever known. For a moment she didn't pull away. Then she looked toward the horizon where the prairie met the night. Maybe strength is just what's left after. There's nothing else. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. That what she had was more than strength. It was courage. But before he could, a shooting star streaked across the sky and she smiled faintly. Maybe that's a sign, she said. Of what? That even after fire, she whispered, something beautiful can still burn bright. Jacob's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her everything. That he no longer cared about bets, that her scars didn't matter. That the only thing he saw when he looked at her was the woman who made this empty house feel like home. But for once he let the silence speak for him. The next morning, Maria found Clara in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, planting new seeds. When Jacob came down for breakfast, Maria nodded toward the window. She is healing, she said quietly. Jacob looked outside. The morning sun caught in Clara's hair, where the light brown strands had begun to grow back soft against her scarred skin. Yes, he said, voice thick. And so am I. Weeks later, the first roses bloomed along the fence, stubborn red flowers growing from dry, cracked earth. Clara's laughter carried across the yard, light and pure. Jacob watched her, realizing something simple and undeniable. The bet had been the worst mistake of his life and the best thing that ever happened to him. He'd gone looking for a way to prove himself and found something far greater. A woman who'd lost everything yet taught him what truly mattered. Not pride, not power, but grace and love that could bloom even in the ashes.